My daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said, "You don't belong here, Mrs. Halbach. Please leave." For a moment, I just stood there in the middle of the showroom, surrounded by glass and whispers, feeling every year of my quiet devotion turned into something small. But instead of crying, I took out my notepad, wrote down every word, and smiled. She didn't know that her boss had already called me that morning, and that the real story was only beginning. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. The rain had stopped just before I reached the dealership. Water glistened on the asphalt like tiny mirrors, each one catching the gray morning light. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than they needed to. It wasn't that I was nervous about buying a car. Not really. I just hadn't driven into downtown Houston in years. Not since Henry passed. His old watch hung loosely around my wrist, the same one he used to tap whenever I made him late for dinner reservations. I parked beside a row of sleek sedans that probably cost more than my house. The smell of waxed metal and wet pavement wrapped around me as I stepped out. For a second, I considered turning back, but curiosity pushed me forward. Maybe Isolde would smile. Maybe she'd even offer me a coffee before she recognized me. Maybe today wouldn't hurt. The glass doors opened to a world too spotless for its own good. White floors, chrome fixtures, the quiet hum of air conditioning. Every reflection looked sharper than life, every sound too polished. I straightened my scarf and walked in. The receptionist didn't look up until I cleared my throat. "Welcome," she said flatly, pressing a few keys before glancing at my shoes. "You can wait by the restroom seating area. Someone will be with you shortly." She motioned toward a bench at the far corner of the showroom, next to a water dispenser and a stack of magazines from last year. I nodded, pretending not to notice the man in the navy suit who had just been offered espresso and a leather chair. The hum of conversation floated through the room, words like financing and upgrades and leather package. I sat quietly, counting the ceiling lights, then pulled a small notepad from my purse. I wrote the date, the time, the woman's name tag, Zinnia Smart. I underlined it once, folded the page neatly, and slipped it into the back pocket of my purse. Paper doesn't forget. A flash of perfume and heels clicked against the tile. I didn't have to look up to know it was Isolde. Her voice, smooth but sharp, carried across the floor. "Who's sitting there?" Zinnia lowered her tone. "Just an older lady. Said she's here to browse." Isolde's heels stopped a few feet from me. "Mother Halbach," she said finally, like the words tasted sour. "You're shopping." I smiled. "Just looking." "For someone younger?" she asked, eyes gliding over my worn purse. Her tone could have sliced glass. I smiled again, a smaller, quieter one, and said nothing. Silence had become my safest language. A salesman at the next desk laughed suddenly. "Hey, Isolde, you'll hit your bonus if retirees keep window shopping Rolls-Royces." The laughter rippled through the room like static. I felt it more than heard it. My pulse slowed to a crawl. I folded my hands in my lap and stared at the poster behind her. "Walk-ins welcome." Isolde glanced over her shoulder, smirking. "Avon," she called, waving to the security guard. "Could you check if this area is clear? We've got limited seating for clients today." The man approached politely, almost apologetic. "Ma'am, would you mind waiting outside for a moment?" I looked at him, then back at the poster. "Of course," I said softly. I took out my phone and snapped a photo, the sign, her reflection, and mine all caught in the glass together. That would be enough. Outside. The rain smell lingered. The air was warm, the kind that clings to your skin, but not your heart. I adjusted my scarf, holding the brochure no one had offered until I asked. The dealership doors closed behind me with a hiss. The glass caught my reflection. A woman past 60, standing tall in worn shoes. Still here, I whispered to the window. Paper doesn't forget. Then I walked toward the parking lot. As I reached the parking lot, I heard a voice call after me, sharp, commanding, and painfully familiar. "Excuse me, did you forget your brochure?" Her voice sliced through the parking lot like cold wind against wet skin. I turned, squinting past the glare on the glass doors. Isolde stood framed by the bright showroom lights, one manicured hand resting on the door handle, the other holding the same brochure I'd just taken. For a second, I thought she was trying to be kind. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she regretted how things ended. I took a few hesitant steps back toward the door, but then I caught the expression on her face. Not apology, not confusion, just irritation. When I stepped back inside, the sound changed, polished heels clicking, low laughter, the faint hum of air conditioning that felt too cold for spring. "Mrs. Halbach," Isolde said, her smile thin as paper. "These vehicles are, well, they're a bit out of reach for your budget, aren't they? This area's for clients with pre-approval." A couple of her co-workers looked up, smirking. One whispered something I couldn't catch. I straightened my scarf. "Then please note," I said quietly, "that you've refused service." Her brows arched. "Excuse me?" "I'd like that noted." I repeated, "You've refused to show me a car?" The man behind her stifled a laugh. My cheeks burned, but my voice stayed steady. It was a strange kind of calm, the kind that comes when humiliation passes the point of pain. "Security," Isolde called out, her tone sharp now, professional, as if reading from a script. "Avon, could you escort this woman out?" The guard, the same man from earlier, hesitated before walking over. His radio clicked once at his belt. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm really sorry, but I've been asked to make sure the floor stays clear for clients." "I understand," I said. "Would you please write down the reason for removing me?" He blinked. Excuse me?" "For the record," I said, keeping my eyes on his badge, "if you could write the time, the name of who requested it, and the reason." Something flickered in his face. Surprise. Maybe respect. He nodded slowly, then turned toward the reception desk, where a small black logbook sat open beside the sign-in sheet. He wrote a few words, tore a slip of paper, and handed it to me. "Thank you," I said, folding it carefully into my purse. As I walked toward the exit, the air shifted. A quiet hush rippled through the showroom. I looked up, through the glass wall above the staircase. A man stood watching, tall, suited, his tie loosened. The plaque near the office door read, "Marcus D'Angelo, General Manager." He didn't look away when our eyes met. His expression wasn't judgment or pity. It was something closer to curiosity, the kind that said he'd been here long enough to recognize when something wasn't right. I nodded once, and he gave a subtle one in return. It lasted less than a second, but it steadied me. Outside, the sunlight had sharpened. My car sat alone near the edge of the lot, droplets drying on its hood. I leaned against the door for a moment, breathing hard, then pulled out my small notepad. My fingers shook as I wrote every word I could remember. 1047A, Houston Auto Plaza. Employee, Isolde Ramsey. Incident, escorted out by request. The word escort looked heavier in ink than it had sounded aloud. I pressed the pen harder until it left an indentation on the next page. Then I underlined it. Once, before getting in. I looked back through the glass. Isolde stood near the reception desk, her arms crossed, watching me. Even from here, I could see the set of her jaw, that restless confidence that comes from believing you've won. I almost smiled, because she didn't know, not yet, that every word, every minute, every action was already written down. By the time I reached home, that single word, escort, was still echoing in my mind, right beside another, proof. When I got home, the silence felt like a warm quilt after a cold rain. My house always greeted me the same way. Soft light through the blinds, the ticking clock on the mantel, and the faint smell of cedar from the old desk Henry and I had shared. I placed my purse on the counter, then walked straight to the small writing desk in my office. The folder from this morning waited there, the words I'd scribbled still pressed into the paper. Escort her out. They looked heavier than they had at the dealership, like bruises on pale skin. I traced each letter with my fingertip, then exhaled slowly. Inside the bottom drawer sat the sealed folder marked Hutchins Trust. I hadn't opened it in months, not since Arthur Hutchins, Henry's trustee and lawyer, had handed it to me. "For your records," he'd said then, smiling. I broke the seal now with a paper knife and unfolded the documents. The first page carried my name in bold ink, Principal, Beneficiary, and Executor, Ruth Halbach. The second listed assets under the estate, properties, accounts, and one line I'd forgotten until this very moment, Rolls-Royce purchase authorization, gentleman account. Arthur's voice came back to me like an echo through years. "It's just to keep the taxes neat. Ruth, you're the principal. It's all still yours." I had nodded, half listening back then. Now I understood. The gentleman account wasn't some old remnant of Henry's business partners. It was mine. The dealership where Isolde worked sold cars for that very account. My breath caught in my throat. The irony was perfect. My daughter-in-law had mocked me for not affording their cars, and yet I owned the legal entity that could buy them all. I sat for a while, letting the realization settle. There was no anger, just an odd kind of clarity, like light after fog. I smoothed the papers, clipped them back into the folder, and reached for the phone. When the line connected, a male voice answered briskly. "Houston Auto Plaza. This is Marcus D'Angelo, General Manager." "Mr. D'Angelo," I said, "this is Ruth Halbach. I believe you saw an incident in your showroom earlier today." A pause, then a careful, measured tone. "Yes, Mrs. Halbach. I did. I'm calling regarding a trust purchase scheduled under the Hutchins Trust, the gentleman account," I said, each word precise. The line went completely still for a moment. "You're Mrs. Hutchins?" he asked. I smiled to myself. "I'm Ruth Halbach, widow of the principal." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him exhale. "I see. I'd like to confirm a few details with you, if possible." "Of course," I said. "I keep records." By the time I hung up, the tension in my shoulders had faded. Something was shifting. Not loudly, but certainly. I had planted the first stone in a quiet path back toward dignity. Later that afternoon, Marcus reviewed the security footage. I could picture him doing it, the glow of the monitor reflecting on his glasses, his hand frozen on the mouse as he watched Isolde signal the guard. The timestamp read 10:47, exactly matching my notes. Proof had its own rhythm, patient and unstoppable. He paused the video when my face appeared on screen, calm, composed, refusing to lower my gaze even as I was escorted out. That pause, that still frame, was all I needed. At home, I gathered everything on the desk, my notepad, the small receipt slip from Avon, and the photograph of the showroom poster. Walk-ins welcome, with the timestamp clearly visible at the bottom corner. I printed it, slipped it into a clear sleeve, and placed it neatly inside the trust folder. "They'll learn today that paper speaks louder than pride," I murmured. When I turned off the lamp, the folder's gold lettering caught the last bit of daylight. By morning, I wasn't nervous, just ready. And when the phone finally rang, Marcus's voice was calm, deliberate. "Mrs. Halbach," he said, "could you come in today?" I arrived at the dealership just after 9:30, sunlight glancing off the polished windows. Marcus had asked me to use the side entrance. "For privacy," he'd said. The hallway smelled of toner and fresh coffee. He met me at the door, his expression polite but deliberate. A folder rested on the desk, its label neat and unmistakable. Delivery and title, Hutchins Trust. "Thank you for coming. Mrs. Halbach," he said. "I'm not here for revenge, Mr. D'Angelo," I replied. "Just resolution, quiet, if possible." "That's exactly how we'll do it," he assured me. His tone carried a weight I recognized, controlled authority, like a man steadying a situation before it tilts too far. He opened the folder, glancing over the documents before sliding one toward me. "This confirms delivery of your vehicle. Before we finalize, I need to address what happened yesterday." I nodded. "Paper remembers. Marcus. So does footage." He smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am. Let's start there." Marcus played a few short clips from his monitor. On the screen, Isolde's figure appeared sharp and rehearsed, gesturing, calling Avon. I saw myself, smaller in the frame but steady. The timestamp read 10:47 A. The same time in my notes, Marcus matched it against the incident log. Perfect alignment. Then I handed him the printed photo of the walk-ins welcome poster, timestamp visible in the corner. He studied it, nodding. "Clear and consistent," he said. "This will help HR." He made 2 calls, brief, professional, one to HR, another to his floor supervisor. I caught fragments: standard delivery announcement, training reminder, client acknowledgement. Every word folded neatly into procedure. When we walked down to the showroom, the sound changed. Laughter, sales chatter, the soft hum of engines being detailed. Chrome gleamed beneath the ceiling lights. Isolde stood mid-pitch beside a silver SUV, all poise and perfect posture. A couple leaned in, hanging on her every word. Zinnia spotted me first. Her smile faltered. Avon noticed too, straightening near the podium. Marcus leaned closer and murmured, "I'll handle the words. You just stand beside me." The floor quieted as Marcus raised his voice. "Attention, team." He began. Tone firm, but even. "Delivery announcement." Conversation stopped. Even the sound of the coffee machine paused mid-hiss. Marcus turned toward me, then addressed the staff. "This gentleman's Rolls-Royce, ordered under Hutchins Trust and represented by Mrs. Ruth Halbach, has arrived on schedule." The sentence hung in the air. Someone near the Bentley bay lifted a phone, recording instinctively. The whisper of disbelief rippled through the room. I felt every eye shift toward me. Isolde's face drained of color. "That can't be right," she said, her voice catching. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. I kept my hands folded, eyes steady. No triumph, only balance restored. Then Marcus turned. "Ms. Ramsey," he said evenly. "Yesterday you ordered a customer removed. Today you learned she was our Rolls client of record." Avon stepped forward, unsure if he should intervene. Marcus continued, calm but firm. "HR will follow up. For now, please surrender your badge and device. Isolde stammered. This was policy. Zinnia told me to. She didn't. Stop, Marcus said softly. It was a breach of conduct. We respect elders, and we respect all clients. Please hand me your badge. The couple she had been courting stepped back. Uncomfortable. One whispered, "Let's go." Isolde's jaw tightened. Slowly, she unclipped her badge. The small piece of metal clicked faintly against Marcus's palm. That sound marked the end of her authority. The customer who had been recording approached us carefully. "Ma'am," she said, looking at me. "I recorded yesterday's scene from the waiting area, and this one too. You might want it for your records." Marcus accepted the phone, transferring the clip, logging it as evidence. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. The woman smiled at me. "My mother's your age," she whispered. "I'd want someone to stand up for her too." I touched her hand lightly. "Thank you for seeing me," I said. After the crowd thinned, Marcus turned to me again. "Would you like to review your Rolls-Royce delivery now?" "No," I said. "Have it detailed and stored. I'll arrange pickup quietly." He nodded. "Understood." Zinnia brought the final paperwork, hands trembling slightly. I signed where she pointed, the pen strokes deliberate, unhurried. Avon walked me to the exit, at the door. We exchanged a small nod, no words, just mutual respect, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken when both parties have lived long enough to understand it. Outside, the air felt cleaner. By the time I reached my driveway, the phone was already ringing and my son's voice carried someone else's story. The phone started before I even set down my keys. I had just come home from the dealership, my pulse finally slowing after that strange, exhausting morning. The house felt heavy in its stillness, every clock ticking louder than usual, the air thick with something unspoken. Then the ringing again, persistent, sharp, like it refused to let the quiet breathe. The screen lit up. Daniel. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the answer button. My son hadn't called in days, not since the last dinner when Isolde complained about how hard it is to balance work and family. I pressed accept anyway. "Mom," he said, voice clipped, already brimming with accusation. "What did you do to Isolde? She said you humiliated her in front of everyone." I stood there by the window, looking out over the yard where the sunlight fell in streaks through the branches. I could have defended myself, shouted, explained, but I'd learned long ago that silence unsettles more than anger. I waited until he finished. Then, slowly, I said, "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done for your own mother. Once." He exhaled sharply, the sound of disbelief and resentment tangled together. The line buzzed between us, empty for a moment, before he started again. "Marcus called me," Daniel said. "He said there was some incident. Do you realize how that makes me look? I work in the same circle. Mom, you dragged family into business." I could hear him pacing, shoes hitting tile, his temper climbing step by step. "Marcus called to correct your wife's behavior," I said quietly. "Not mine." He didn't hear it, or maybe he didn't want to. "You've always had it out for her," he said, voice cracking. "You make her feel unwelcome every chance you get." The words hit harder than I expected. I closed my eyes. "Daniel," I said softly, "when someone tells you who they are, believe them." He scoffed. "You sound just like you did when Dad died, like everything has to be your lesson." That one landed. I felt it somewhere deep, the way grief sometimes returns in echo form, not as pain but as proof it was real. Before I could respond, he cut the line. The abrupt silence hummed in my ear, like a wound still ringing. I stared at the phone for a long time before pressing a small silver button on the base. Record. The feature was old, part of the landline I'd kept since my husband passed. The screen blinked, recording active. I let the emptiness of the room settle around me, then renamed the file, Daniel. 2:47 p. For a while, I just stood there. Then I replayed his last sentence. You always make things about you. Mom. It sounded smaller the second time. Petty, rehearsed. Still, I wrote it down. The time, the tone, the phrase. It joined the other papers in my binder. Proof set. Family. The next call came not even 10 minutes later. Isolde's number. Her voice was trembling, but not from tears, from rage. You ruined my career, she spat. I leaned against the kitchen counter. I didn't ruin it, I said evenly. You did when you told me I didn't belong. She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You think anyone's going to believe you? I'll tell Daniel everything. Before I could answer, the line went dead. I looked at the phone one last time, then turned it face down. The silence after that second call wasn't empty. It was cleansing. By 4 o'clock, the sun had softened. I took my binder and notebook out to the back porch, where the wooden swing creaked gently in the breeze. The oak trees along the fence caught the last light of day, their shadows spilling long and gold across the grass. I spread the papers across the small table. Incident log, photos, notes, and now, the call recordings. Each sheet carried a piece of the truth. I arranged them in order, my fingers steady, deliberate. The weight that had sat in my chest since the dealership began to lift, not because justice had been served, but because clarity had replaced confusion. Proof wasn't revenge. Proof was protection. The wind moved the edges of the pages, rustling them like whispers. I placed a smooth river stone on top to keep them still. Then I closed the binder. Inside the house, the phone sat silent. I hoped it would stay that way, though a part of me already knew better. Peace never lasts long in this family. By morning, a letter would arrive that would change everything. The morning was too quiet to trust. Even the wind seemed hesitant, holding its breath over the magnolia trees that framed my porch. I was pouring the first cup of coffee when I heard the hum of the mail truck pause out front. No footsteps followed, just a soft metallic clink, the sound of something placed on wood. When I opened the door, there it was, a cream envelope resting against the porch railing. No stamp, no return address, just one word written across the front in impatient cursive. Private. The handwriting was unmistakable. Isolde's. I stood there for a moment, sunlight cutting through the morning haze, the air damp from dew. Part of me wanted to toss it straight into the trash. Another part wanted to document it first. Instead, I carried it inside, setting it beside my mug. The paper seemed to breathe in the quiet, daring me to open it. I stared at it through 3 slow sips of coffee. Then I broke the seal. Inside. The letter was typed, neatly, almost too carefully, on dealership letterhead. My daughter-in-law's words marched across the page like bullets. She accused me of defamation, claimed I had spread lies to Marcus D'Angelo, and intentionally caused harm to a professional reputation. Toward the end, a line was underlined. If this matter is not resolved, I will pursue legal action for damages. The absurdity of it made me exhale a short laugh, though it didn't reach my eyes. A threat written on borrowed letterhead. She didn't even use her own stationery. I traced my finger over the dealership logo and murmured, "A borrowed weapon never hits its mark." Still, I knew better than to dismiss it. People like Isolde always underestimated paper until it turned against them. I folded the letter once, placed it on my desk, and called Arthur Hutchins. Arthur had been my husband's attorney for 20 years, now the trustee overseeing our estate. His voice came warm but alert, the way people sound when they already expect trouble. "Arthur," I said, "she's escalated." He listened without interrupting while I read the letter aloud. When I finished, he sighed. "She can't sue you for defamation, Ruth. She made that statement at her place of employment, and corporate security documented the event. It's intimidation, nothing more." "She printed it on dealership paper," I added. "Then she's just handed you another form of proof." He said, "Keep everything, photograph it, write the time it arrived." "I already did." He chuckled softly. "Of course you did." After we hung up, I slipped the letter into my binder under proof set, family, and logged the entry. Threat received, 8:15 up. The ink from my pen bled slightly into the paper, leaving a small shadow under each word. I stepped outside to breathe. The air carried that faint metallic scent of an oncoming storm. That's when I noticed the mailbox, its lid not fully closed. I walked over, opened it, and my heart gave a slow, tired ache. Inside lay another sheet, a photocopy of the same letter, but this one had a yellow sticky note attached, the handwriting loud and smug, "For the HOA president." My jaw tightened. She wasn't content to accuse me privately. She wanted the neighbors involved. Public humiliation the suburban way. "So she wants a trial," I whispered. "Then let her have one, with documents." I brought the copy inside, placed it beside the original, and scanned both into my computer. A new folder appeared on my desktop. Threat chain. Each file was time-stamped, each page labeled. I made sure the metadata preserved the hour, minute, and device. Then I wrote my own letter. Short, neutral, surgical. To whom it may concern, this message constitutes harassment and misrepresentation. All records of this incident have been forwarded to legal counsel and to the dealership's HR department for verification. Ruth Halbach. No emotion, no flourish, just truth, measured and neat. I emailed copies to Marcus and Arthur, CC'd Human Resources, attached scans of both letters, and added one sentence at the end. For record purposes only. The clock read 9:02 when I clicked send. Outside, the sky had brightened, but I could feel the storm still circling somewhere beyond the rooftops. I gathered the originals, placed them in a clear sleeve, and locked them in my file drawer. My pulse finally slowed. Sometimes silence isn't enough. Sometimes paper has to speak for you. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat by the window as the mail truck passed again, unaware of the war it had delivered that morning. By afternoon, Daniel would show up at my door, holding that same letter, asking if any of it was true. The knock came just as I finished filing the last of the morning's papers. It wasn't loud, but it carried urgency. 3 short taps, a pause, then 2 more. I knew that rhythm. My son had always knocked like that, even as a boy, when he came home late and didn't want to wake his father. When I opened the door, Daniel stood there holding the same cream envelope Isolde had left that morning. His face was drawn tight, the kind of tension that lives between love and accusation. "Mom," he said, voice clipped and heavy, "we need to talk." I stepped aside. "Then come in before the neighbors make it their business too." He followed me to the kitchen. I poured tea without asking, the same ritual that once meant peace in this house. The clink of porcelain against wood was the only sound between us. Daniel placed the envelope on the table. "She said you're trying to ruin her life," he began. "She says Marcus is siding with you to make her look unprofessional." I kept my hands around the warm cup. "Did you read the letter or just repeat what she told you?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes wandered to the window, then back to me. "You embarrassed her in front of her whole team. You didn't have to make it a spectacle." I breathed through the ache rising in my chest. She embarrassed herself. Daniel. I simply existed where she didn't want me. His jaw clenched. "You make it sound so simple." "It is," I said quietly. "Truth usually is." He shook his head, frustration bubbling. "Do you realize what this has done to my reputation? Marcus called this morning. He said HR is investigating my wife. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I looked at him. "My son, standing in my kitchen like a stranger. You're angry because people finally saw what you've ignored." He winced. "You always make it about you, Mom, about your pride." My hands rested flat on the table. Steady. "No, Daniel. I make it about principle. There's a difference." All the silence that followed was long enough to hear the wall clock ticking. Somewhere outside, a dog barked, then quieted. He couldn't look at me. Finally, he exhaled hard. "She told me you're recording everything, that you're building a case like this is some courtroom drama." I didn't deny it. I keep records because memory fades, and truth doesn't. He laughed, short and bitter. "You sound just like Dad when he was disappointed in everyone." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. "Then, at least I'm consistent." He leaned forward, voice rising. "You think you're the victim, but you've crossed a line." And that's when I saw it. The faint red blink from the pen in his shirt pocket. I froze, my breath shallow. "Daniel," I said softly, "is this conversation for me or for her?" He blinked, startled. His hand went to the pen, covering it instinctively. "Isolde said I needed proof," he muttered, the shame already forming in his voice. "Proof of what?" I asked. "That your mother speaks plainly?" He looked down. I reached across the table, took the pen gently from his pocket, and turned it off. The light disappeared. I placed it between us. "You'll have proof," I said, "just not the kind she expects." He looked lost. A grown man suddenly small again, cornered by the truth he didn't want to face. I stood, walked to the cabinet, and retrieved a folder labeled Incident Log. April. "Take this," I said, handing it to him. "Read it when you're ready. Every date, every name, every word is documented. You'll find no anger there, only facts." He hesitated, then took it with shaking hands. "Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore." "I know," I said. "That's what happens when you let someone else do your thinking." He nodded faintly, eyes glistening. "She said you'd turn me against her." I gave a sad smile. "No, Daniel. She did that all on her own." When he finally stood to leave, he paused at the door, holding the folder like something fragile. "Will you be okay?" he asked. "I've been okay for longer than you realize," I answered. He opened his mouth as if to say something more, but the words never came. I watched him walk to his car, shoulders heavy. The engine started, then idled for a moment before fading down the street. I stood at the window, my reflection faint in the glass. The house felt both emptier and lighter. "When you finally see the truth," I whispered, "don't apologize, just come home." The tea on the table had gone cold, but the quiet around me was warm again, steady and mine. That night, I decided not to wait for apologies. I decided to prepare for what was coming. The house was quiet except for the soft creak of my desk chair. Dusk settled outside, the sky melting into a copper-gray hue that brushed against the blinds. The folder Daniel had taken that afternoon lingered in my mind like a half-closed door. I could almost hear his voice again, filled with doubt and borrowed anger. "If he's blinded," I whispered to the empty room, "I'll light the path myself." I unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet labeled Proof Set, Family. Every file, every name, every timestamp I'd recorded had a place. The ink on the pages no longer looked like pain. It looked like order. I began sorting everything chronologically, the hum of the desk lamp keeping rhythm with the steady beat of my resolve. It was time to turn my paper trail into something no one could erase. I switched on the scanner. The soft whir filled the air, blending with the distant hum of traffic outside. Page by page, I fed in letters, screenshot, copies of the dealership report Marcus had sent earlier. I organized them into digital folders: letters, calls, HR evidence, personal notes. The files grew. So did my calm. When the scanner paused, I labeled 3 USB drives with my own handwriting: A, B, and C. The first would stay in my office safe, the second in the kitchen drawer behind the old recipe box. The third, I slipped into a small metal tin and walked it to the shed out back, my converted workspace that still smelled faintly of cedar and oil. I pried up one floorboard near the workbench and tucked it beneath. "Paper tells a story," I murmured, "but data keeps it immortal." When I came back inside, I wiped the drive's serial numbers off the notepad and shredded the slip. My husband would have smiled at the precision. He used to call it my quiet accountant's armor. At the computer, I opened my email and typed a short message to Arthur Hutchins. Subject for legal reference. No action yet. Body Arthur, attaching documentation per our conversation last month. No urgency, just preservation. Regards, Ruth. The attachment was a single zipped folder titled Family Matter. Zip. Inside it, every thread of the story, the insults, the security report, the letterhead threat, waited like soldiers in formation. Before pressing send, I added a BCC to my attorney's assistant. Not because I distrusted Arthur, but because I'd learned that truth needed witnesses too. Then I clicked send and sat back. My pulse stayed steady. For the first time in days, I felt no tremor in my hands. But I wasn't finished. I opened a blank email from a new address, one I'd made years ago, back when I sold vintage furniture online. Using that account, I attached a redacted version of the dealership footage Marcus had shared. The faces of customers were blurred. Only the conversation between Isolde and Avon was clear. I typed one line: "Integrity deserves witnesses." Then I sent it to Marcus's work address. No signature, no trail. Afterward, I deleted the entire draft history and emptied the trash. The act was quiet, methodical, almost graceful. A faint smile found its way to my lips. Let truth travel faster than gossip. I shut off the computer and walked outside. The Texas evening had deepened. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and rain from somewhere far away. Crickets pulsed in rhythm, their sound blending into the hum of the neighborhood. I sat on the porch swing with a cup of chamomile tea. The warmth seeped into my palms as I watched the moon rise, soft and deliberate. My husband's voice came back to me, as it often did at moments like this. You can't argue with people who believe their lies, just outlast them. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. I took it as a sign. The dominoes were set. All I had to do now was wait for the first one to fall. The coffee maker sputtered its last breath of steam just as my phone began to vibrate across the counter. I didn't need to check the caller ID. I recognized the pattern of urgency in Marcus's timing. "Good morning, Mrs. Halbach." His voice came through, polite but strained. Corporate compliance wants you on a call regarding yesterday's file. Would you be available in 15 minutes? I would, I said. But let's agree the call will be recorded for all parties. A pause, then, understood. When the line disconnected, I straightened the papers spread across my kitchen table. The binder, labeled Proof Set, Family, sat squarely in front of me. Beside it, USB drive B and a notepad. My husband used to tease that I organize grief the same way I organize taxes, neatly, without sentiment. He wasn't wrong. I brewed another cup of coffee and waited for the incoming link when the screen lit up. Marcus appeared in the top corner, tie slightly loosened, expression weary but respectful. The corporate compliance representative's window appeared next, her tone measured, her face unreadable. "Good morning, Mrs. Halbach," she said. "We appreciate your participation. Today's agenda involves the dealership incident, employee conduct, and subsequent correspondence. You may proceed when ready." I nodded. "Let's proceed." The first 10 minutes moved briskly. I shared time-stamped clips from the dealership's security footage, the original letters, and the phone call logs from both Isolde and Daniel. Each file was documented, labeled, and submitted without commentary. Marcus verified receipt and added quietly, "Corporate also received a redacted video from an anonymous source. It aligns exactly with Mrs. Halbach's submissions." I didn't blink. "Integrity deserves witnesses," I said. The compliance officer raised her eyes slightly, then continued. "Our preliminary findings suggest a breach of customer protocol, discriminatory remarks, and potential harassment by an employee acting without managerial authorization." Marcus leaned forward. "On behalf of the dealership, I extend our apology. Mrs. Halbach, you should never have been treated that way." I folded my hands. Steady. Apologies are words. Accountability is restoration. The rep nodded, typing quickly. "Duly noted for record?" At her request, I sent one final file, the threat chain folder. It contained scans of the letter on dealership stationery, the copy Isolde had placed in my mailbox, and the memo showing the HOA president's handwriting where she'd received the same. "Received," the compliance officer confirmed. "We'll escalate this to HR and regional management today. Thank you for your clarity. Mrs. Halbach, your documentation has been comprehensive." When the call ended, Marcus lingered for a few seconds on screen. "You've handled this with more grace than most of us would." "Grace," I said, "is just self-respect with patience." After the meeting, I printed a few key pages and placed them into a fresh folder marked Corporate Review. Then I slipped on my jacket and walked down the street to the HOA office. The president, a petite woman named Marianne, looked startled to see me. "Ruth, I was going to call you," she said, gesturing toward her desk. A copy of Isolde's letter sat there, folded but clearly read. "I imagine you've heard quite a story," I replied. She sighed. "More than I wanted. People talk. I prefer facts." I laid the official corporate email on her desk. "That letter constitutes harassment and misrepresentation. I'd appreciate the HOA discouraging rumor sharing." Marianne read the page, nodding slowly. "I'll issue a community note this afternoon, something firm but civil. That's all I ask." Walking home. The Texas heat began to rise, sharp and steady. By the time I reached my porch, my phone buzzed again, a message from Daniel. "Daniel, corporate called us. What did you send?" "Me. The truth. Nothing else." I set the phone down and exhaled. The air smelled faintly of honeysuckle and printer ink, a mix of the natural and the procedural, both things I understood well. Inside. I archived the recording from the compliance meeting and logged the time. 9:47 a.m. Then I added one final note beneath the entry. All voices accounted for. No further commentary required. I closed the binder gently. The house was still again, except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. When storms pass, I murmured to myself, what stays standing isn't noise, it's paper. And with that, I poured the last of my coffee, knowing that before noon, the next chapter of this reckoning would already be calling. I arrived 10 minutes early with my binder and the silver USB labeled C. The conference room smelled of polished wood and someone's nervous perfume. Through the glass, I could see the showroom 2 floors below, the same bright floor where I'd once been told to leave. Marcus rose when I entered and offered a restrained nod. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Halbuck." Across the table, Isolde sat rigid, eyes cold, a phone face down beside her like a shield she couldn't quite lift. The corporate compliance representative introduced herself, set a legal pad down square with the table edge, and said we were here to establish facts, not feelings. "That works for me," I answered, placing the USB on the table as if setting down a house key. She began with a clean preamble about respect, ethics, and record keeping. Marcus slid the laptop toward me. "If you'll connect your drive," he said. The first clip opened to the lobby. Isolde at the desk, my back in frame. Avon near the edge, unsure. Her remark about an elderly customer, window shopping luxury, drifted through the speakers, light and sharp. A clock in the corner ticked toward the timestamp in my notes. Behind the desk, the poster reading "Walk-ins Welcome" glowed in the camera's wash. The representative paused the video, glanced at my notebook, and then at Marcus. "The time matches," she said. He nodded. We watched the moment Isolde signaled for security, Avon's hesitation, and my quiet request that the reason be written down. The clip ended not with drama, but with a door, closing softly behind me. I passed across an index of documents and 2 printed transcripts of phone calls. The representative skimmed, then stopped. "There's a second audio file?" I pressed play. My son's voice filled the room, tight with fatigue. She said I needed proof. In the background, you could hear his steps on my kitchen tile, the same path he wore in high school when he crammed for chemistry. On the recording, I answered, even and steady, that I hadn't ruined anything. Isolde had chosen her words in public, and paper simply remembered. Someone in the room exhaled. Isolde's jaw flexed. "That's out of context," she said. "It's harassment." The representative lifted a hand. "We'll get to conclusions after the record." When I offered the threat chain folder, the letters left on my porch and the copy placed in my mailbox for the HOA, letterhead misused, dates circled in ink. "I kept everything," I said, "not to hurt anyone, to keep the truth from wandering." Marcus read from a prepared summary compiled by HR and compliance: employee misconduct, breach of equal service policy, misuse of company letterhead for personal threats, escalation outside managerial channels, attempted intimidation of a customer. The language was dry, but it carried weight. I watched the wood grain, tracing its quiet rivers with my eyes. Isolde leaned forward, voice low and fast. She set me up. The representative didn't change tone. "No," she said. She documented. The words landed like a gavel, soft, final. Outside the glass wall, a porter rolled a tire display past a sunlit hood. Chrome caught the light and threw it back into the room like a reminder. The representative announced next steps in careful phrases. Effective immediately. The company would terminate Isolde's employment for cause. She would have the right to an internal appeal, but no showroom presence pending review. Regional training on elder respect and equal service would be renewed. A written apology would be issued to me and archived with the incident log. Marcus closed his folder, looked at me, and said, "On behalf of the dealership, I'm sorry for what you endured in our building." I nodded. "Accountability is restoration," I answered, and signed the acknowledgement form with the same pen I'd used to take notes the day they tried to escort me out. Daniel had slipped in after the decision, standing near the door like a boy late to homeroom. When the room turned toward him, he swallowed. "Mom," he said, soft as a bruise, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I let the words sit until they belonged to both of us. "Now you do," I said. "Learn from it. Not for me, for yourself." He nodded, eyes on the binder he'd once treated like an accusation. For the first time in weeks, I saw the man who used to carry groceries without being asked. He said nothing else, which was wise. There are apologies that fix and apologies that begin. His would need time. Isolde stood abruptly. HR collected her badge and company phone. The door closed on the click of her heels, a brisk, angry metronome fading down the hall. The room exhaled. Marcus walked me to the elevator. We passed the balcony where, the day before, a customer had raised her own phone and captured a sentence that shifted the floor beneath all of us. I remembered Avon's quiet nod when I left the showroom after signing, and Zinnia's hands shaking as she handed me the paperwork. Today the building felt different. Not kinder when exactly. Just honest. Outside. Noon sun painted heat across the glass towers and warmed my shoulders. Traffic hummed along the avenue. The air held the faint iron scent of motor oil and a clean aftertaste of relief. I stopped at the showroom door and looked at my reflection in the pane, the same door I'd been told to leave. An older woman looked back at me, chin level, hands steady. People imagine power is noise. Sometimes it is the refusal to raise your voice, the patience to let paper speak for you. They had said I couldn't afford their cars. The truth was simpler and harder. They couldn't afford my silence. I crossed the plaza and sat on a shaded bench until the tremor left my hands. That evening, when the house went quiet and the cicadas began their choir, one voicemail waited, patient as a closed door. The house was still. For the first time in weeks, I thought the storm had finally passed. The papers on my desk were neatly stacked, the binder closed, and the faint scent of chamomile drifted from my mug. Outside, cicadas droned in the thick Texas air, a sound that usually meant peace, but tonight it felt like the quiet after a verdict. I wiped the table, tucked a stray note into the drawer, and reached to turn off the lamp. That's when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up in the dim room, one new voicemail, Daniel Halbach. My breath caught. I stood there a long moment, staring at his name. It had been days since we'd spoken beyond the corporate meeting, where he'd said so little, but looked like a man unraveling. I pressed my thumb against the phone, then pulled it back. Maybe it was another argument, another half-truth passed through guilt. But something about the hour 8:46 p.m. told me it wasn't. I poured what was left of my tea into the sink, dried my hands, and sat down. Then I pressed play. The line clicked, followed by the sound of him exhaling. His voice trembled. "Mom, I just needed to say, I listened to the recording." The room seemed to hold its breath with me. "I heard everything," he continued. "The way she spoke to you, the letter, the calls. I didn't want to believe it, but I did. You didn't deserve what she did. What I did. Believing her." His voice cracked on the last word. He paused, and I could hear traffic through the car window on his end, the rhythmic thump of a blinker. She left. Mom, after the meeting, packed her things, said she needed time. Maybe she'll never come back. I don't even know if I want her to. Another breath, shaky. I just didn't know how blind I'd been. The next words came softer, like he'd turned away from the phone. I don't know if you'll ever answer, but I love you. I really do. Then silence. I stared at the phone, the screen dimming to black. My reflection shimmered faintly on it. Older, wiser, and tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Outside, the cicadas had grown louder, their rhythm almost like applause. I didn't cry. Instead, I exhaled, pressing my palm against my chest as though to steady the heartbeat that had quickened halfway through his voice message. He finally saw. I whispered. The words felt lighter than I expected, like releasing a bird that had waited too long in a cage. For a while, I just sat there, letting the stillness fill the spaces where anger used to live. Then I unlocked my phone again and opened a blank message. Come by for dinner tomorrow. Your favorite stew. I stared at the blinking cursor. I could almost see him walking through the door, the way he used to after football practice, sweaty and smiling, asking what smelled so good. But I also saw the man who'd stood on my porch weeks earlier, letter in hand, ready to believe the worst of me. After a long minute, I deleted the text. Not out of resentment, but out of respect. Some lessons, I thought, need space to grow. Forgiveness wasn't silence. It was restraint. I placed the phone beside the framed photo of my wedding day, where my husband's hand rested over mine. He's learning, I told the photograph quietly, just like we hoped he would. The night had cooled. I opened the back door and stepped into the yard. The oaks rustled above me, the same trees that had watched me stand alone weeks ago when shame burned through my chest. Now their leaves whispered a softer kind of story. The moon hung low, pale and deliberate. I stood beneath it, hands in my pockets, the earth still warm under my bare feet. I kept the proof, I murmured, but more importantly, I kept myself. The air around me felt lighter, as if even the night understood. The crickets swelled again, their sound folding into a calm applause. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then stopped. Inside. My phone blinked once with a new message. I didn't check it. Not yet. I wanted to remember this moment, the stillness that comes only when truth has finally spoken for itself. When I turned back toward the house, the kitchen light framed the doorway like a soft halo. Tomorrow could hold anything, a visit, a silence, maybe even a beginning. For now, I was content to let the night keep its peace. And as I closed the door, I didn't realize that one final letter was still waiting for me in the mailbox, beneath the morning dew. The morning broke in pale gold, spilling over my driveway and the damp grass still jeweled with dew. The cicadas hadn't started yet. It was that thin, forgiving silence between night and day, the kind that makes you believe for a heartbeat. That time can pause long enough to start over. I slipped on my robe, opened the front door, and walked toward the creaking mailbox. The hinges groaned in protest. Inside, among the flyers and a folded grocery ad, sat a certified envelope stamped with the blue insignia of Hutchins Motor Group. My hands didn't shake this time. The air was cool against my palms as I carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter while the kettle began its slow hum. For a long moment, I just stood there, watching the steam rise, listening to the tick of the wall clock. Then I broke the seal. The letter began formally, typed on crisp company stationery. Mrs. Ruth Halbach, our internal review has concluded. We extend our deepest apologies for the incident that occurred at our downtown dealership on April 17th. It went on to acknowledge me as a purchaser in good standing, confirming my rights under the Hutchins Trust. Enclosed were copies of the compliance report and an HR memorandum. Isolde Ramsey's termination for cause, citing breach of ethics and conduct. Near the end, a paragraph stood apart, centered. As a gesture of goodwill and acknowledgement of your grace during this process, a donation has been made in your name to the Gulf Senior Mobility Foundation, supporting safe driving and community transport for older adults. I read that line twice. My reflection in the coffee pot looked back at me, softening. Vindication didn't need to shout. It just needed to be printed, signed, and sealed. By mid-morning, a gentle knock came at the door. I didn't need to look. I knew the rhythm. When I opened it, Daniel stood there holding a brown paper bag. "Bagels," he said quietly. "I didn't know if you'd eaten." He didn't step inside until I nodded. I noticed how he placed his phone face down on the counter. No distractions, no recordings, just presence. "I came to talk," he said, "not to defend her or myself." We sat at the table, the sunlight sliding across the floor between us. I poured coffee, then handed him the letter. He read it silently, shoulders loosening by degrees. "They donated in your name?" he murmured. I nodded. He exhaled, then whispered, "I should have stood up sooner." "We both learned," I said, "the hard way." I pulled a notepad closer, its pages blank except for the word "today" at the top. "Let's write something down," I said. "Not a contract, just a promise." He looked at me, curious. "Rule 1, I began, writing slowly so he could see. "Respectful contact. No talking through others." He nodded. "Rule 2, monthly dinner at my place. If emotions run high, we pause 24 hours and try again." His eyes met mine for the first time that morning. "That's fair." Rule 3, grandchildren first. School, health, safety, above pride. We both signed our initials at the bottom, the ink still wet as we dated it. Saturday, May 4th. I tore the page neatly from the pad and slid it into a plastic sleeve from my binder. It wasn't legal, but it was binding in a way the law couldn't touch. We sat in silence, sipping coffee. It wasn't awkward, just still, like the moment between tides. Then a knock at the door startled us both. My neighbor. Mrs. Keller smiled through the screen, handing over a stack of misplaced envelopes. "This got mixed with Daniel's mail," she said. Tucked inside was a folded piece of construction paper in crayon, 3 stick figures on a porch under a huge yellow moon. The caption, uneven but clear, read, "Dinner at Grandma's." Daniel's voice wavered. "They drew that last week." I traced the outlines of the little figures, one tall, one medium, one with a bun and glasses that could only be me. My throat tightened, but I smiled. "Looks like we already have our first appointment." That afternoon, I drove to the storage facility on Highway 6 and parked the Rolls inside its designated unit. I signed the handoff, then slid behind the wheel of my old sedan. The seat creaked, the steering wheel felt right again, worn, dependable. As I drove home, I thought a car proved a truth, but it never defined me. By dusk, Daniel returned with the kids. The porch lights were already on, glowing soft and amber. We ate chili and cornbread at the picnic table. Shoes kicked off, laughter rising when one of the kids spilled milk and gasped as if expecting trouble. "Accidents happen," I said, dabbing the table with a towel. The child smiled, and Daniel's eyes glistened. After supper, the children chased fireflies in the yard while Daniel helped me with the dishes. When he reached for the last bowl, our hands brushed. He didn't speak, just gave a small squeeze, an unspoken thank you, and maybe I'm sorry folded into one. Inside, the drawing hung on my refrigerator door beside the HOA notice about neighborhood kindness. It looked perfect there, a small promise made visible. When they left, I sat on the porch, the evening air cool and gentle against my skin. The oaks swayed softly, whispering their approval. I looked toward the kitchen window where the light still glowed and thought of everything that had happened, every note, every bruise, every document that told a story no one could erase. And as the night settled in, I found my closing words, quiet but firm. I kept the receipts. More importantly, I kept my place at the table. When I look back on everything that happened, I don't see revenge or victory. I see lessons. I learned that keeping your dignity doesn't mean staying silent. It means speaking through truth, not rage. I learned that proof, when used wisely, isn't about punishment, it's about protection. And most of all, I learned that peace comes when you decide to stop chasing apologies and start rebuilding yourself. If you've ever been disrespected, ignored, or made to feel small, remember this: your worth isn't determined by who sees it. It's proven by how you stand when others try to erase you. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to stand up quietly for your own respect? What did you learn from it? If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with it, share why. I'd still love to know your story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next story. Every week, I'll bring you another tale of strength, family, and dignity, from one heart to another.